Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is a series about creating a better sweater. And it's meant to accompany our remake along for 2018. But hopefully the series will stand on its own as a kind of mini design process workshop that could help others who are thinking about how to read knitting, how to modify patterns, how to kind of come up with your own design elements. That's my hope, at least. As most of you know, I'm the host of the Knitting the Stash podcast and the Knitting the Stash blog. And if you've been watching the podcast for a while, you know that my favorite thing to do is modify sweaters. And you've probably seen me modify things like the Alias cardigan, or most recently a Denali, a Noragon pattern for Spencer, my husband. And I really just like getting into patterns and kind of mucking around, figuring out what's working, figuring out what's not, and making sure that my shaping and sizing is actually going to fit the person that this garment is for. So through all of that modification, it's really led me to kind of dig into these patterns and get a better sense of how they're structured and what kinds of information to take away from them, what kinds of steps we need to keep in them, and what kinds of steps where the modifications can actually happen. And so that's led me to think about some of the sweaters in my own closet. And I often, you'll see me wearing my own sweaters that I've created, but I like everyone else, have a bunch of sweaters in my closet that I got from big box stores or that were handed down to me from my mother or my grandmother. Sweaters that are falling apart, sweaters that are in disrepair, sweaters that are made out of a material or that I don't really like. They have a funny drape, they're not long enough. There's always some kind of thing about those sweaters. So this series is meant to be a moment when we could all take at least one of those sweaters out of our closet and read the knitting off of it, and then decide what we like and what we don't like and what we want to change, and create a new sweater that resembles the old one, but's better in every way possible. So that's what the series is about. And to that end, I'm going to have, I think, 8 or 10 videos. And this is not meant to be a kind of fully immersive design pattern workshop. It's meant to be much more about process, like how is it that my process works in terms of reading knitting, modifications, pattern considerations, design considerations, etc. So I'll give you like a little glimpse into the way my strange brain works, and hopefully you'll find that helpful. We'll cover things, today we're going to talk about sweater evaluation, like choosing a sweater for this kind of project. But we'll also talk in later episodes of this series about things like how to measure your sweater, what kind of swatches you need to make, what kinds of yarn might work best for your sweater, body measurements, things like design characteristics of some of the sweaters, things to either add or remove. We'll talk about sweater math, and I have a video up about sweater math, but we'll talk a little bit more in depth about stockinette stitch sweater math and sweater math for things like cables or color work. And then we'll kind of bring it all together to try to think a little bit about how to keep good notes for whatever it is that you're doing, so that maybe you could recreate your sweater again later with it kind of scaling up or scaling down, maybe even. We'll see if we get that far. So it's meant to be a kind of fun, process-oriented series, and I'm really happy that you guys are all here. We do have a Ravelry thread going for this remake along in 2018, and if you're watching these videos after 2018, I hope that you'll come over to the Ravelry thread anyway and check out all the finished objects that people came up with during the year, and share your sweaters and your remake projects. So, on today's installment, I've got a few things I want to talk about. One is, why do we love the sweaters that we love? Like, what is it about them that really gets us, and how do we kind of capitalize on that? Number 2, a very basic kind of sense that there is a field guide to sweaters, and there are certain kinds of characteristics that a lot of sweaters share one way or the other, and you can kind of diagnose or identify sweaters based on these characteristics. I want to talk about whether or not your sweater that you love is the best candidate for this remake along project, and how to assess that kind of thing. And then finally, we're going to take a closer look at this sweater very briefly, so that when we get back to talking about design in the next installment, we'll have already started talking about some of the major elements. So, sweaters we love, why we love them. It's a good question, really. This is the sweater I'm planning on using for the remake along, and it is a big box store sweater that has full cable paneling on the front. It has reverse stockinette stitch on the back and on the sleeves, and it appears to have a kind of raglan shaping to it. I love this sweater because it fits me. It's really nice. It just is like the right length. It works on my shoulders because of the raglan shaping. I have wide shoulders. Problem with this sweater is that it's made out of some kind of cotton acrylic blend, and I just don't like the way it feels. Like if I'm touching the fabric or the sleeves, it's got a little bit of a slimy, plasticky kind of feel to it. So I'm not in love with that. And I think that I'm not terribly in love with this reverse stockinette that's going on everywhere. I understand the purpose of it, but I don't really like it all that much. So those are some things I would change about this sweater. But I do love it because it fits. Sometimes we love sweaters because they have a kind of nostalgic value. This is actually one of my mom's old sweaters, and I inherited this maybe a decade ago, maybe longer. And it's on the surface, it's just this really plain stockinette, set-in sleeves, high collar. But what's cool about it is that it has this kind of embroidery across the yoke that I love, and it goes all the way around, front and back, right? It's really a beautiful sweater. And I love it too because it was my mom's sweater. What I don't like about it, again, the fabric is that acrylic-y kind of stuff, and it's about 2 inches too short. So whenever I'm wearing it, I'm always like pulling it and kind of stretching it. And it's, you know, you can see it's wear and tears. It's got a little hole up here, the collar's kind of stretched out. It needs some help, you know? Similar to this sweater, which I love, this is a big box store sweater, which the fabric doesn't bother me as much, you know, the composition of it, and I love the colorwork yoke. And this is, it does have set-in sleeves, so it was machine knitted and steeked. But what I don't like about it is that it's too short. Once again, a sweater that's too short. It's just sad when sweaters are too short, don't you think? But I do love it because of the design element of that cool color work. Similar to this guy, which is my kind of funky work sweater. This guy has zippers, and the zipper in the front. It has these cool pockets. It's got these variegated yarn panels, and it has these saddle shoulders, so it fits me really well. The trick about this one is I'm not terribly sold on the navy blue. It's just not my thing. So if I were to remake this one, I'd want to do it in a different color, but I'd keep the saddle shoulders, right? So there are lots of reasons to love the sweaters that we love, and it's important to remember all of those reasons because those are the things that we want to maintain when we remake our sweater into something better. So as you go over to your closet and start pulling out your own sweaters to see if there are any candidates for this remake along project, there are a few things to keep in mind, and one of them in a big kind of way has to do with design elements that are kind of common to a lot of different sweaters. You want to look at things like, how is the sweater constructed? Is it seamed up? Is it worked seamlessly all the way around in the round? I have a cardigan here that I'll pull up, and this cardigan is one of my go-to work sweaters as well, and it is not seamed, so it was worked all the way around in the round, unlike the sweater that's on the mannequin, which was seamed. You can see that over here. There's a nice seam running down the side. So you're going to look and see whether or not your sweater is seamed. The other simple way to do that is to check, turn your sweater inside out and look for those machine knit seams, which will often be the case with these kind of big box store sweaters. So seaming or seamless is one thing to think about. Neckline is another thing to think about. There are several fairly standard kinds of necklines. There's V-necks and crew necks, cowl necks, Henleys, you name it, funnel necks, lots of different kinds of necks. So that's a design element that you want to see what's going on with your sweater, because it's something you could change pretty easily. You want to think about sleeve construction. Is your sweater a raglan, like this one? Is it a set-in sleeve sweater, such as this one? Is it steeked, right? Do you need to knit this tube and then steek in the sleeves? Is it a saddle shoulder? such as this guy that I was showing you, right? And this one you can see that the shoulders were knit flat, and you can see this part was extra on the sleeve, and it kind of sits up on top of your shoulder, so that's a saddle shoulder. Drop shoulders come down here, the seam is down here on your upper arm. So how are your arms constructed? And then what kinds of techniques are going on there? Do you have cabling, color work? Is it just plain stockinette? All those kinds of things. So as a basic kind of field guide to identifying your sweater, those are some of the things and some of the terms you might think about to identify what it is that you actually have in your closet. Now, as to whether or not your sweater is a good candidate, that's another discussion. And I think there are 3 things to consider. The first is you as a knitter. Who are you, right? Are you a beginning knitter? Have you ever knit a garment before? Are you an advanced knitter who really loves complex cables and color work? Are you comfortable with techniques like steeking or with setting in sleeves? Would you rather knit something flat or in the round? So who you are as a knitter really matters, because then when you look at your sweater, which is number 2 comes in, what is the sweater going to require of you? If you wanted to remake this sweater, you'd have to be comfortable with an all-over cable panel with potentially raglan shaping, unless you were going to work it a different way. And there are some other sweaters I've showed you that would require you to be comfortable with like zippers and pockets and all that other kind of finishing work. So the third thing to think about in the case of is your sweater a good candidate is what's your vision for the sweater? What kinds of things do you want to change about the sweater? And are you up to the task? Now, I think it's okay to challenge yourself. One of the things I've always done is take on projects that are a little bit beyond where I think I am, and that often helps me learn a lot more and develop much more as a knitter. So I encourage you to challenge yourself. But you got to think realistically, like what is your vision for this project? How can you make it a successful project? Are you planning on adding in a full front panel of cables even though you've never worked on cables before? I don't know, that's up to you. But those 3 things are pretty important. Who you are as a knitter, what your chosen sweater requires of you, and what your vision of that for that sweater is. Those will all help you figure out if your sweater is a good candidate for this project. Okay, so the last thing I want to do today is take a minute to start thinking about design elements with this particular sweater that I'm going to be working on. So I've told you a little bit about it already in terms of the front cable paneling. I'm going to go to a stitch dictionary to double check and try to find some patterns for the cables that are on here. Though you could read them pretty directly, and I don't think you'd have too much trouble writing the pattern out to chart those. But I'm going to go to a stitch dictionary and we'll talk about that next time. But what's interesting about these machine knit sweaters from big box stores is that they can actually have very different things going on the outside versus the inside. So this sweater, for example, I showed you, it looks like it has a raglan construction, and raglan construction means, generally speaking, that you work the body up to the armpits, you work the sleeves up to the armpits, you join everything together, and then you start doing decreases here, here, and the same in the back. And that's what this sweater looks like on the outside. But the minute you turn it inside out, because it's a big box store sweater and it was machine knit, you can see that the raglan is an illusion, and the sleeves were actually knit flat and seamed in. Now you can see the decreases on the sleeves here and here all the way up. So the sleeves were knit with the idea of creating this kind of faux raglan, and the decreases take place up toward the top, but they're set in and seamed. Now, what that means for a sweater such as this one is that if you were going to recreate it, you have a couple choices, just like you do with any sweater you might recreate. You could go with the classic, what appears to be raglan construction, or you could switch things out and say, you know, I kind of dig the seaming. I kind of dig the machine seaming. And so I'm going to knit my sleeves flat and I'm going to seam them in and make it look like a faux raglan. Cool, right? And if you turn a lot of these sweaters inside out, you'll find out different kinds of things about them. This one, for example, the colorwork sweater, I'll just turn this one inside out real quick, have a look, see what's going on in there. And turning your sweaters inside out can just tell you a lot about their construction and what's going on. So, the body of this one was knit into a tube, and then it was steeked open, and the sleeves were attached. You can see that there, right? And so you could choose with a sweater like this to do a kind of tube with your color work and then steek it, or you could choose to do a more traditional yoke and do an all over yoke pattern as opposed to setting in your sleeves this way. Again, the choice is yours. So I hope you all will go to your closets, pull out some fun sweaters, turn them inside out, have a look at the patterns, think about who you are as a knitter, and be ready to get started on this project together with me. And the next installment of this series, we're going to talk about design considerations, and we'll break out some stitch dictionaries and start thinking about what we might want to add or change, and what are those big elements for sweaters. So I'll see you next time, and in the meantime, go hit those closets. I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this has been the first installment in a series about creating the better sweater. See you next time.